So, if you grew up Catholic or Christian, you were probably told that Kundalini, the serpent, yoga, even ancestral healing, that all of it is demonic. But here's the truth, that fear was never about God, it was about control. Because if you really step back into history, you'll notice in Egypt, Greece, India, Cambodia, the Mayans, Africans, Australia, everywhere you look, the serpent is not evil. It is actually wisdom. It is healing energy. It is ancestry. So today I'm putting all of the receipts on the table, scripture, history, and even science. So by the end of this Sovereign Sisterhood Movement podcast episode, you're going to see that the serpent is not demonic. It is the healing energy of your body, of your nervous system, and your connection to God. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Veronica Barragan, Kundalini Yoga therapist and founder of the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. And in today's Sovereign Sisterhood Movement podcast episode, we're going to dive deep into the teachings of Kundalini, the serpent, and why we have been told it is something to fear. And this is something that is very near and dear to my heart because today I'm not coming to you from a place of further separating from others or from a place of preaching or even fear. I'm coming to you from a place of sharing my own testimony. Because when I think about the work that I do and how I myself broke patterns of generational trauma, when those cycles were broken, what ended up happening was that the connection to God within me was restored. I rebuilt my inner temple by rewiring my brain and nervous system through Kundalini Yoga therapy and through the teachings of Christ consciousness, of Jeshua, and A Course in Miracles. And my testimony is that all of us can have a direct experience of God. So, the purpose of this podcast episode is so that you yourself can have your own personal experience of the divine. But before we talk about that, we have to talk about the lie and we have to expose it because we're coming into this time where humanity is pretty much pivoting and has this opportunity to turn this entire ship around. We're literally moving through the same things and same experiences that our brother Jesus Christ, Jeshua, was moving through. And if we can all accept the Christ consciousness within us by not being afraid of our power, but not being afraid of those things that they have made us afraid of, like Kundalini energy, then we can all do what Jesus Christ said we were here to do. Bigger things than I will you do. So let's talk first about religion and how it has taught us to fear our own power. When you think about Kundalini energy, they called in religion the serpent something bad, like Satan, because they purposely misinterpreted what Jesus Christ was saying about the serpent. And when you think about meditation, what do they say in religion? And it's dangerous because it opens you up to to demons and all these things in the mind. It opens the mind to things that you don't want it to enter. Excuse me, but the only demons that are activated through meditations are the ones you're holding within, and you shouldn't feel ashamed of that because demons has nothing to do with demonic. Even that word, they made it seem evil. Demons has to do with emotions, and you are not your emotions. And even think about ancestral healing. When you think about ancestors, and then a lot of religious people are like, don't talk to the dead, that's evil. And it's even branded as rebellion against God. But let's check the facts because we're going to look at this scientifically, spiritually, and energetically. And first and foremost, we have to remember that our DNA is literally a double serpent wrapped around a central staff. And it's not demonic, that's our biology, right? And spiritually, all the great masters all over the world, Jesus Christ, Jeshua, Krishna, Moses, even in the Bible, the serpent has been mentioned, but we've been taught we should fear it because those using control actually knew what it really meant, which is restoring of your power, of doing what Jesus Christ said, you will do bigger things than I have ever done. That's what the Kundalini energy awakening in you through meditation was really all about. So let's look at first, before we get into the biblical perceptions or the biblical teachings of the serpent, let's look at the historical facts. Then we'll get into biblically what that means. But across all civilizations, the serpent shows up as a symbol of life, as healing, as divine connection, as energy healing. In the Mayan culture and civilization, we know Kukulkan. And Kukulkan is like the feathered serpent, right? I visited the Mayan temples in Chichen Itza, which was there on the outskirts of Cancun and Yucatan and the Yucatan area. I also went to the Mayan temples in Palenque. And in Kukulkan is known as the feathered serpent. In Chichen Itza, which is the outsides of Cancun, there's a temple there that they honor, and every equinox, they honor Kukulkan, and every equinox, every solstice, Kukulkan makes an appearance as the serpent snake that comes down the temple. And they were not afraid of him. They literally built a temple so that could happen because they saw the serpent as life force energy. And these temples, all of these temples are created in sacred geometry, and they're created as representations of your brain. So they would use these temples to go meditate, especially on days like the solstices and the equinoxes, because it would expand their consciousness, it would expand their nervous system capacity to knowledge, to access knowledge that was already within them. Same thing with the Mexica. Some of you know them as the Aztec, but their real name was Mexica. The Mexica in Teotihuacan, which is the capital of Mexico, I visited there as well. In every one of these temples, I had an incredibly heart-opening experience because, again, they're created in sacred geometry as replicas of your brain. So when you enter into these energy grids, your brain goes through an alteration of consciousness too, and your nervous system, it's attached, it's all connected, right? That's what happened to me in Teotihuacan as well. That one I remember very clearly because the minute that I walked in, I hadn't even touched the temple. It was just the land where I was in. I was in the middle of the moon and the sun pyramids, and this energy just took over me, and I just started crying and crying. And it felt like I was just like purging eons and eons of like grief. That's what it felt like. And it was very relieving and cleansing. But that's what the Kundalini energy does. And there, they know the serpent as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god of wisdom and rebirth. And then we have in India, and in India, it's represented by many different things like Kundalini energy, right? Life force energy. Kundalini yoga is the science of energy, but Kundalini is life force energy. And they also knew the serpent as the Nagas. And where the Nagas come from is actually from Cambodia. I just went to Angkor Wat and my ancestors have been really guiding me signs everywhere. You need to go to Angkor Wat, which is like the biggest temple in the entire world. It's bigger than, I forget what city, but it's super huge, right? And they only give us access to entering parts of it. I see myself going back there and studying like an archaeologist and really learning more because when I went there, I had an incredible heart opening experience as well. And one of the temples you can actually, the heart chakra frequency it was created in that sacred geometry so that the heart chakra itself becomes activated. And that's where I had this really mystical experience where I again started crying and crying. Same thing that happened in Teotihuacan, which our guide, who was an archaeologist, wasn't even surprised. Without him explaining to us, he understood what I was going through because of the heart chakra and what was happening in that temple. But in Cambodia, the reason why I wanted to go there so much and why my ancestors were taking me there were because I saw a lot of serpents there, and they are their empire, which is known as Khmer, which was an empire that first was huge. It was all over Thailand, Vietnam, and all of Cambodia. So it encompassed all those countries, Laos as well, four different countries. And the Khmer people, they actually trace their ancestry to this Naga princess. Her name was Niang Neek, and she married this Indian traveler guy who was traveling through Cambodia. And they came together, and her father of Niang Neek then created the land for the first Khmer Empire to be born and to be so that his grandchildren could basically live there. And then that's where the Khmer Empire was created. It was created because of an Indian travel who married a serpent princess. So from the Khmer civilization standpoint, we come from the serpents. And like we're all connected, by the way. Every time you go to a different country, I don't know if you've traveled a lot, you see so many similarities, whether it's through the spirituality, through how they live, especially as it relates to those people that still are connected to their roots. So when we look at other countries too, or other civilizations, like in China and also in Vietnam, the serpent is more represented like as a dragon. But the dragon is known there as Long, and it rules over rain and heaven. And there's a goddess in China known as the goddess Nuwa, who has this serpent body that shapes all of humanity. And then we have in Egypt. Egypt has what is known as Wadjet, which is the cobra on the pharaoh's crown, the protector of the kingship, right? In Greece, another one of my favorite countries, I went to Athens and this beautiful island. I didn't want to go to the islands that everyone goes to. Typically, when I go travel, it's a pilgrimage, and I'm called to specific areas based on my ancestors. And I really wanted to go to Crete because Crete is where they say Zeus was born. Another incredible experience that I had in there. But in Greece, the rod of Asclepius is a serpent on a staff, and it's today it's still medicine symbol. So they saw the serpent basically as healing energy as well. In the Hebrew Bible, the Nehushtan, it's a bronze serpent lifted for healing. In indigenous North America, we have the horned serpent. It was feared, but it was also honored, right? Not evil. It was also honored. In the Cherokee tribe, they had what is called the Uktena. In Africa, the rainbow serpent, who is known as Usumari, cycling wealth and regeneration. And even in Australia, the rainbow serpent, creator and life force energy. So here's the pattern. Everywhere on earth, the serpent is tied to life, water, fertility, healing, ancestry, and the only place it actually became evil is in religion, or basically any empire that needed control, which is what we're literally experiencing right now. So now let's break down the biblical verses that have been misinterpreted, by the way, and they've been misinterpreted and they have made us afraid of the serpent and of generational healing to keep you in this loop of fear coming in, you projecting guilt out. So I'm going to start with Genesis 3:1 because Genesis 3:1, I feel that really breaks down the actual serpent in a way that I feel gets confused the most. Because when you think about it, when I think about Genesis 3:1, I think about the story of Adam and Eve, right? And think about the story of Adam and Eve. What was the number one thing they talk about? Well, they say that the serpent basically convinced Adam and Eve to be evil or to bite of the fruit of knowledge, like if it was an evil thing. So in Genesis 3:1, it describes the serpent speaking to the woman in the Garden of Eden. And it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? And there's several other variations of that where the serpent is subtle and speaking to Adam and Eve. And that's where we very quickly start to believe that the serpent, it was just here to destroy humanity. But this is where you have to understand the truth. You have to read the Bible from your heart. The reason that Jesus Christ, Jeshua, he spoke in parables was because the English language in itself butchers so much and makes you stay in these egoic programs and loops of fear and guilt. My son, for example, is studying Vietnamese right now, the language. And he says that in the Vietnamese language and many other languages, you don't say, I am sad or I am angry. It's just the word sad, anger, but you don't add I am to it. And in the English language, it's done on purpose so that we can identify and believe that we are the emotion, or that we are the sinner, or we are that, which then adds commotion to the emotion. And then we get stuck and then thinking that something is inherently wrong with us. And that's the whole thing with the English language. That's why to read the Bible, you have to read it with your heart, not with your logical mind. And to understand all of this, I had to take a lot of studying of A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is the teachings of Jesus Christ, Jeshua, that were downloaded to a psychotherapist from Columbia University who wasn't even spiritual at that time, so that they could come together for a bigger cause of healing their department at Columbia University, but more importantly, like bringing these teachings to the world. Because through A Course in Miracles, I was able to then understand what the Bible really meant. And it was what led me to Gnosticism. Because Gnosticism is what I truly believe that Jesus Christ was. Because in Gnosticism, the word gnosis means knowledge. And it's not intellectual knowledge, it's direct knowledge, experiential knowledge of God within. That's the difference between what religion teaches you versus Gnosticism, which was already flourishing in the first centuries, right when Christ was around, and even after Christ. But with the second rebranding of the Roman Empire, from the Roman Empire to the Roman Catholic Church, they started to ban it, and they started to say it was heretic teachings, because it was teaching the exact things that Jesus Christ was teaching. Now, I don't know the actual origins of Gnosticism. Some people say that it came from this one apostle whose name is Simon the Magician. Other people say that it came from Jesus Christ itself, because what Jesus Christ was really here to teach was that you did not need a priest or a guru or a church to access God, that God was within you. And even when you think about the Protestant Reformation that happened in the 1500s, Martin Luther, they said blasphemy when he said that God is not just in the church for the rich people, that God is everywhere. And they wanted to get rid of him because they're like, what do you mean? He was teaching Gnosticism. And Gnosticism, many of those texts were hidden and they were destroyed when the church consolidated power, when they legalized Christianity. But there's still a lot of collections like the Nag Hammadi Library, which was discovered in 1945 in Egypt, that preserved all of their teachings. And in Gnostic Christianity, Jesus is not primarily the sacrificial lamb who dies for sin. He's the revealer of gnosis, knowledge, one who awakens humanity from the false world of the demiurge, which is a god, a false god. This is the God of the Old Testament. That is the angry God, the vengeful God. That's not God. That is the false God who basically feeds off of the lower human emotions. So, what Jesus represents is the Christos, the eternal light of the true God, who came to remind humanity of its divine origin, that you are also an expression of God. I'm not saying I am God or you are God. God wanted to experience herself through you. And that's where the serpent and the story of Adam and Eve come into place, because the serpent in Eden, which is demonized by institutional religion, is reinterpreted, especially by the Gnostics, and what Jesus Christ was really here to teach us, as the one who opened Adam and Eve's eyes to higher consciousness, aligning with Christ's mission. Jesus Christ, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, he said in John 8:3-2. So God created the serpent. God does not create evil. The serpent is knowledge. They made it evil because they didn't want you to remember your knowledge. So the serpent actually is in this quote of Genesis where it talks about the subtle serpent, is subtle because it carries forbidden wisdom that threatens oppressive systems. That's why. And in the Gnostic lens, the serpent is not Satan, it's a liberator, an archetype of the divine spark walking humanity from ignorance. Think about it. Why did they crucify Jesus Christ because he was sharing gnosis. He was sharing, he was a liberator. He was not Satan. They made you believe he was Satan. They made you believe he was a bad person. And that's why they were doing that to him. Just the way they use propaganda to do all these evil things in the world. It's the same group of people and their descendants that have done this for hundreds and thousands of years. Because what this does is that it flips the mainstream story that the fall of humanity, because they took a bite out of the apple of knowledge, is actually the beginning of awakening to self-knowledge, to self-awareness, where God wants to remind you of who you are. But see, the whole thing is that when we have patterns of generational trauma, like abuse, physical, sexual, any type of abuse like that. If we grew up with parents that were going through their own depression, anxiety, if we, whatever it is, even colonization or genocide, all of those things, religious trauma, telling you that you are a sinner, all of those things actually make us feel that we are not worthy to carry that Christ consciousness. And that's why we got to flip the screen and re-educate and rewire our nervous system and brain so we can allow that God presence to come back into the temple, which ultimately is our brain. These are your temples, and this is where God resides in the pineal gland. It's in the Bible too. We're going to get to that. Now, in A Course in Miracles Spiritual Psychotherapy, which is the teachings of Christ, this is where it gets really interesting because this is where we talk about the origins of separation. In A Course in Miracles, it says, to extend is a fundamental aspect of God, which he gave to his son. In the creation, God extended himself to his creations and imbued them with the same loving will to create. So in the creation, God extended himself. I want to experience myself, God said, to his creations, all of us, and imbued them with the same loving will to create. We have free will in the physical, but we're all under the will of God. We're all going to come home. Even the most people that you think are the most evil, they will accept the atonement. They will accept the Christ consciousness in them. When or how is none of our business, because we're only here to do that for ourselves, because when we do it for ourselves, we do it for others, right? And then it says, you have not only been fully created, but have also been created perfect. You are not inherently a sinner. There is not something inherently wrong with you. And then it says, there is no emptiness in you because of your likeness to your creator. You are creative. You have the free will to create here. No child of God can lose this ability because it is inherent in what he is. But he can use it inappropriately by projecting. That's the trauma. When we're under patterns of generational trauma, when we've experienced genocide, war, colonization. Look, think about how sad, like the Native Americans. They came, they colonized, they cut their hair, they put them in training camps, so re-education camps, they called them, so that they could forget their connection to nature and to their roots. So then the trauma comes in as fear, and then we project it out as guilt. And that's what God is saying here in A Course in Miracles. It also says in this section, the inappropriate use of extension or projection occurs when you believe that some emptiness or lacks exists in you, that you're an inherent sinner, that the serpent is bad, and that you can fill it with your own ideas instead of truth. And this process involves the following steps. There's 4 steps. And these 4 steps are very important and relevant to what we're talking about here as it relates to the serpent and evil and what they've been programming us with. First, you believe that what God created can be changed by your own mind. Second, you believe that what is perfect can be rendered imperfect or lacking. Third, you believe that you can distort the creations of God, including yourself. And fourth, you believe that you can create yourself and that direction of your own creation is up to you. This is the real fall of humanity. How many people right now are going through some kind of psychosis and they believe that they are God themselves, or they believe that they are Jesus Christ? that, think about even what happened on Sunday with the memorial that they did for that gentleman that they assassinated, which is very sad. No one should be assassinated for what they believe or what they're trying to say or whatever. But they said things in that room like he died for you. Guilt, martyrism. We're trying to like make false idols. That's what God meant by that. And it didn't mean that the Hindu gods are bad or and only Christ is king and you should only believe Jesus Christ. That's not what it meant. It meant that you have to stop idolizing anyone outside of you, including Jesus Christ. Because Jesus Christ said, I'm out of here, you guys, because you guys are not understanding what I'm saying, that you will do bigger things than I have ever done. We idolize Christ because we feel that we can't do what Christ did, which is to forgive unconditionally, to love unconditionally, to own his power, the Kundalini energy. And so then we distort the creations of God, including ourselves. We think we're sinners and we think those around us, especially the ones that hurt us, that they're evil, that they don't have the Christ in them. This is why we need the spiritual psychotherapy. It's what we teach in my community. We believe that what is perfect can be rendered imperfect. Again, sin, and we just did an entire teaching on this inside of my community. Sin makes it seem like it's a forever thing, like you're broken forever. We all make mistakes in this world, but because we've been made to believe in an evil or angry God, we think that forgiveness is not for us, and we think that we're marked for life. And then we think we're imperfect or we're lacking something. Why? Because we believe that what God created can be changed by our own mind. That's the same thing they did with the serpent. God created it, and now we think it's evil or bad. If God created it, God was saying, you, my son, you, my daughter, are ready to self-realize, are ready to evolve. I want to experience myself through you. But they demonize that because they know that if you remember the knowledge that God is within you, then they cannot control you. So then the Garden of Eden or pre-separation condition was a state of mind in which nothing was needed. It's just a state of mind. When Adam listened to the lies of the serpent, the Course says, all he heard was untruth. You do not have to continue to believe what is not true unless you choose to do. Lies of the serpent in the Course in Miracles is in quotes because they were not lies. God doesn't make mistake. God wants you to self-realize, and knowledge, which is direct experience of God, the serpent, is not bad. It's telling you are ready to access the knowledge. You're ready to access this Kundalini energy from within you. You're ready to restore your knowledge of who you are in the Garden of Eden. So when we look at the Bible, the entire way that this has been misinterpreted, it follows the same patterns. For example, there's a scripture that says, by his spirit, John 26:13, he has garnished the heavens. His hand has formed the crooked serpent. God made the serpent as creation, not as evil. Crooked doesn't mean the serpent is crooked like a thief. Crooked is the winding path that it takes because Kundalini serpent energy lives at the root of your spine and you awaken it through meditation. And Kundalini yoga meditation is the science of that, right? And it's not a straight path up because the generational healing journey and the healing journey in general is cyclical. Sometimes you come back to things to bring more awareness to them. So our job is to build nervous system capacity, rewire our brain and nervous system so that we can become aware of when we're in these loops, right? And then as we become aware of these loops of pain, of trauma, and we respond like the Christ, we respond differently to the loop, then instead of staying stuck in these circles, it begins the natural spiral journey up to the crown. And then when it comes to the crown, because this is your pineal gland, the temples where God resides, it opens up and it overflows from the crown. And this is the overflow that you're creating as a legacy that now is overflowing to 7 generations before and after you. But most of us, this is why we pass only generational trauma, because it doesn't wind up the stair through meditation. It stays stuck here. So then the next generation gets the same patterns of thinking that keep you in this loop. And again, this could be trauma generational, but it also is all the trauma that genocide causes, that war, that all these different things cause, which then cause even more trauma at home. Because how many war veterans go back home and their brains are impacted by the trauma that they went through, seeing these things, unaliving people that they know they shouldn't have unalived. They're traumatized, and then they go, it's like the veteran Vietnam War. All these veterans that left, that made it, because so many of them didn't make it, they went back home and they raised daughters, they got married, and they were going through their trauma, and they raised children that now have to suffer through the same trauma that they went through. Because, of course, it was so impactful, right? So we have to allow, that's what that crooked serpent means. Now, in Kings 6:7-8, it says, the temple built with the winding stairs into the upper chamber. That's the serpent spiral path up the spine. In Corinthians 12:2, it says, Paul speaks of being caught up into the third heaven. That's the language that also matches the Kundalini ascend. In Matthew 6:2, it says, if your eye be single, your whole body shall be full of light. That's the awakened third eye, the pineal gland, the crown lighting up through meditation. In Revelation 5:1, it says, the book sealed with 7 seals that no man can open except the Spirit. What are the 7 seals? Those are your 7 chakras. That's not New Age. This is ancient. The 7 chakras are opened and awakened and activated through Kundalini energy, all the way to the crown chakra. But if we have patterns of generational trauma, if we've been told that meditation is evil, if we've been told that Kundalini is evil, the energy stays stuck at the root. It doesn't travel up the 7 seals. In John 20:22, Jesus breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. Breath is prana. That's serpent energy in motion. That's all that it is. And there's, like I said, in Genesis 3:1, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. And he said unto the woman, yet hath God said, ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. We go back to the same story, right? The revealer of Gnosis. That's all that was. So the serpent is subtle knowledge. It's called subtle because it's discerning, it's perceptive. And this, in mainstream tradition, is seen as deception when it's actually discerning. Even when you look at it from a Gnostic teaching, subtlety means the ability to pierce illusion and reveal hidden truth. That's what that means. How could that be deception? The serpent is not a trickster leading humanity into sin. It's a revealer of the gnosis, right? And Eden is not a literal garden. It's a state of consciousness of innocence. And you can do that in this physical body, regardless of how old you are, by awakening the serpent energy, right? And so to eat from the tree of knowledge is not a fall, but the beginning of self-awareness, of divine remembrance. So everywhere we look, whether it's in verse from the beginning of the Bible all the way to the end, you're going to find the reference to the serpent. In Numbers 21:9, Moses lifts up a bronze serpent so Israel can live. The serpent is the life force energy. And what this means is that in the wilderness, the people are bitten by serpents, which is the symbols of suffering, right? A fear or this thing of ignorance. But God instructs Moses to lift up a bronze serpent, and those who looked upon it were healed. So what does this mean? It's allegory. What poisons you can also heal you if lifted into the light of consciousness, right? So the serpent here is not destruction. It's knowledge that becomes transmuted. It's ignorance becoming wisdom. It's fear becoming medicine. And the bronze serpent, bronze is a fusion of elements, copper and tin, symbolizing matter transformed into spirit. So a serpent cast in bronze, that's wisdom that's embodied and raised up for everyone to see. And this isn't idol worship. It's symbolic of lifting gnosis, knowledge of the divine above fear, and letting that heal you. And all of this is connected to Christ, because just as the Israelites are healed by looking at the serpent, humanity is healed by looking upon the Christ, not just the man Jesus, but the Christos within you. And then both the serpent and Christ represent inner knowledge, which is lifted up as salvation. So when you look at it from a Gnostic term, which is your direct experience of God, Moses is just foreshadowing Jesus, because both lift up the hidden wisdom that heals humanity from ignorance. That's the true venom. If you think about it, it's that ignorance, right? And there's even deeper symbolism, because to me, the pole is the spine, the channel of spiritual ascent. And the serpent lifted is the Kundalini rising, dormant divine energy awakened and brought into consciousness. So it reveals this universal principle. What bites you can heal you. That trauma that you went through, that's the doorway, because you are in a university called life, and the curriculum will show up just the way it showed up for Jesus Christ, so that he could transcend this loop of karma, this loop of fear and guilt. You don't have to stay in that. Trauma, ignorance, fear, when we face it consciously, that becomes the doorway to our liberation. What bites you can heal you. That traumatic experience you went through is the doorway. And Moses lifting that bronze serpent is a precursor to Christ lifting the inner spark of God in each and all of us. Because salvation is not found in avoiding the serpent, but in beholding it without fear. And it goes on and on with all of these different verses. I'm going to give you one last one, because this one will even drive it deeper. What is John 3:14? That's another really good one. In John 3:14, there's this lesson that all of us must learn. And the whole thing about this is, and so John 3:14 is literally like a follow-up what we were just talking about, because it says, and as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. And it references where Moses lifts a bronze serpent on a pole. And what does this mean? The serpent is knowledge and healing. The serpent is not Satan, a symbol of divine knowledge. So when Moses lifts it up, the serpent raises knowledge into visibility, showing that healing comes from facing what you fear, not avoiding it. And when we think about generational trauma, boy, do we avoid it. We tuck it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen. We have this thought sometimes too of blood is thicker than water. I don't want to blame my parents. This is not about blame. It's about acknowledgement and about lifting up the rod so that knowledge can be visible to you. Because when looking upon the serpent, instead of running from it, looking at those things instead of that have hurt us, instead of rejecting them, this represents turning inward to awaken that divine spark within you. And even Jesus compares himself to that serpent, because his mission in a Gnostic view was to reveal the hidden knowledge of God within humanity. So just as looking upon the serpent healed the Israelites, looking upon the Christ, not just as a man, but as the dwelling light from within you, heals your soul from ignorance. Christ lifted up is not only, it's beyond crucifixion, because Christ did not come teach the crucifixion. He came to teach you about the resurrection. And that's it, what that means. It's the raising of your consciousness. or the cross because of a symbol of transcendence, not something you have to carry for as a punishment and suffering for the rest of your life. So the serpent was demonized in Genesis, but in John 3:14, it is actually redeemed. And it's only demonized in Genesis because of the way people perceive it. If they truly understand the teachings at the root cause, they would not teach them that way. But again, it was also taught that way on purpose to keep people under control. Because there's many spiritual traditions. If you look at the ancient Jewish Hebrew tradition, they never saw the serpent as evil. They saw the serpent as a liberator. So this started to happen after these Christianity religions were created from the Roman Empire because of the fact that they didn't want you to know your true power. We understand that the serpent equals Christo's light, Kundalini, and both are rejected by religious authority. Both are misunderstood as dangerous, yet both are true medicine of the soul. The serpent and this Christo's light, because the serpent is the Kundalini rising, the ascent of divine energy, right? And so the scientific perspective of this to help you better understand it is the nervous system and the brain. But why and who made it evil before we talk about that? When we think about why we've always been afraid, it's easy to correlate it back to religion and how they demonize the serpent and always only associated with Satan and with danger, which that fear kept people from awakening from their own power, right? If you knew the serpent was God's power in you, you wouldn't rely on priests, you wouldn't rely on institutions. Same control tactic, remove the knowledge, induce the guilt, instill the fear, which is then why we get stuck in these loops. Fear in, guilt out, fear in, guilt out, fear in, guilt out. Because ultimately, the ultimate meaning of sin is you not accepting the Christ within you. That's what that means. And because when we cannot accept the Christ within us, we also cannot accept the Christ in others. So then there's the illusion of separation actually occurs, right? So the serpent in Genesis, it equals as a cast as a tempter, but through mystics, we know it as the first spark of your awakening. Completely different. And in Christianity, we have to understand that, yes, in Genesis, they start to talk about the serpent being crafty and all this stuff. And then by the time they get to Revelation 12:9, is the ancient serpent directly equated with Satan or the devil. And that's where Christianity locked in the fear. So it's like a process that you start to see reveal itself. But not everyone bought the lie because the Gnostic people during that time, they venerated the serpent as the bringer of knowledge. And other places of the world, of course, India, Southeast Asia, Africa, different parts of the Americas, the serpent always stayed sacred. It was only through Christianity and through the birth of the Christian religion that we really saw a bigger increase of that evilness connected to the serpent. And so when we look at this now scientifically, that's where it gets really interesting because science and Kundalini yoga are describing the same thing, but we're just talking in different languages. So one thing that we have to remember is that trauma absolutely rewires your brain. For example, the hippocampus, which is this part of your brain that's responsible for like memory and learning, it starts to shrink. So if it shrinks, it doesn't function. So your learning becomes stagnant, your memory, you have problems with memory, right? The amygdala, which is like this other almond part of your brain that is responsible for like fear, it's like the fear center. It will stay on high alert. Even if you're on vacation, sitting on a beach, you will be very worried or anxious because of the trauma that you went through as a child or even as an adult. Trauma is losing someone you love, grief, right? And not getting it out of your body because it stays in your body. It doesn't go away with time, right? Or as a child, like I said, being raised by parents that were depressed, that were anxious, that addicted, all these different things where there was abuse, perhaps, all of that, the amygdala part starts to shrink and it consistently stays on high alert where it thinks you're, again, going through that trauma. Your brain doesn't know the difference between perceived trauma and experienced trauma. So even if like you're just watching something on TV. Your body and brain don't know that you're not actually going through it. So your body will start to secrete adrenaline and cortisol. So if you have these patterns wired in your nervous system since you were a kid, a child, or maybe they were wired in the womb of your mom because your mom was going through a lot of stuff when she was pregnant with you, then you're going to always be on this high alert and you're always going to feel anxious. But that's a biological situation that we can change and heal. And then the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of your brain at the front, which is responsible for like logic, feeling safe, and compassion, it just stops functioning. And that's why you get a lot of doctors that feel like they don't have any manners because doctors and surgeons have the highest unaliving rate. Believe it or not, they take their lives because of the traumatic things that they see every day. And it's very traumatizing to them to not save everyone's life. So they might save 50 people's life in a month, and if they lost one, that takes a big toll on them. And if they don't have practices like Kundalini yoga meditation, the brain becomes fragmented. And I can assure you that if we looked at the brains of people that have unalived themselves, have taken their lives, I can assure you that their brain is fragmented, especially in the prefrontal cortex. And I'm sure the amygdala and the hippocampus was also affected. It's not just, oh, coincidence that person did it. And it's basically just stress and trauma, which takes us to the hormones part. Because the hormones, once these parts of the brain stop functioning, now you got cortisol constantly flooding your body. That's why you don't have faith. That's why you don't believe in a higher power. Because with your body filled with cortisol, you're going to feel anxious all the time. You're going to feel hypervigilant. You're going to feel maybe even numb. And when you feel that way, it's a biological problem that, of course, makes you not connected to God. That's why people that have gone through severe trauma, their brains, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the nervous system stays in fight and flight, their hormones are completely out of whack. They become atheist because, again, it's you're going to tell me now to forgive or to believe in God. Seriously? No, because of what happened to me. And it's not, their bodies are like World War III because of all these hormones that are taking over. And then we have epigenetics, which proves that trauma, 95% of it is generational. Grandchildren of those that have survived genocides, like in Vietnam. In Vietnam, it was so sad when I went to Vietnam. Thank God they're thriving now. But these patterns impact three, four, five generations sometimes ahead of them. There was this story where actually it was in Cambodia. In Vietnam, when they went and there was war, this country sadly went and then also sprayed all of the people there with this Agent Orange. It was like a chemical. And this chemical assured them that even three generations post who received this poisonous gas was going to be affected physically. But it's not just physical, it's also emotional. Like when we were in Cambodia, because Cambodia went through a genocide too. It's so sad. It's the same perpetrators all the time. It's so sad. One of our tour guides told us how his mom, even to this day, because that genocide happened in the 70s and she's still alive, thank God. But if she hears a plane, she runs inside of her house because she still has that trauma. So imagine her nervous system, right? Constantly in fight and flight, traumatized because of the war. Then she herself, her nervous system wires with her children's nervous system. And now that became pattern in there. And they have anxiety. Why? Because of what mom went through, not because they experienced the war themselves. That's epigenetics. And that's what it means is that when you've been through trauma, we carry these signatures, these coping mechanisms, these genes in our DNA that can become activated by even more trauma. The way we don't activate these genes of trauma is by changing our environment, which is our lifestyle. And the way we change that is through meditation, through basically Kundalini yoga therapy, because then we change the education of the nervous system and the brain, which changes the environment, which changes what genes are expressing. Because your ancestors didn't just give you trauma, they also gave you lots of incredible talents and gifts. So in Kundalini yoga, it is the science of energy, and Kundalini is the life force energy. And so the serpent energy or the serpent power is coiled energy at the base of your spine, and it rises to heal all of these blocks because your body keeps score of trauma. Like I said, in the psoas, there's a muscle behind your pelvis. Every time you've been through a traumatic experience, it contracts unconsciously. Problem is that if you don't release those memories from the psoas, then you're doing that unconsciously all day and you don't even know it. And when you do that unconsciously all day, it affects all of your other organs because the psoas is responsible for the spine. And then from there, the liver and all of these other things that are connected. So if you're unconsciously contracting all day, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for that traumatic experience to happen again because of what you went through 20 years ago or as a child, then it's affecting your physical health and your mental health. A lot of people that have gone through generational trauma patterns, they have spine injuries or they have multiple sclerosis. I think that's what it's called, basically spinal illness. It's not a coincidence. It's the fact that the psoas keeps contracting and contracting. And that's why you have spinal issues, right? So we have to release the memories from the body so that we can basically remember that God is within us, right? So as the serpent rises, this energy rises through meditation safely, then each chakra becomes unsealed. That's the seven chakras and the seven seals that the Bible talks about. And in those places where trauma was completely shut down, right? It releases those memories. And then we use things in Kundalini yoga like mantra, for example. And this is the science of energy. It's so affirmations, the English language, like I said, it covers so much of the esoteric and the mystical. Mantra is a vibration. It's these yogis thousands of years ago put these sounds together that then give you a specific chemical reaction in the body, in the mind, and in the spirit. But mantra changes the nervous system. It rewires the brain, which rewires the subconscious trauma loops. And so meditation and Kundalini yoga, it allows the serpent energy to move through the muscles, through the fascia. The fascia is the biggest, like it's collagen and it connects all of your organs together and it's piezoelectric. First, that means that it holds memory, not just of your experiences, but also past life experiences and even generational because these things are wired in the nervous system. And then it sends piezoelectric means it sends signals to your body and to your DNA because your DNA is active. Your DNA is communicating and relating to what's around it. And that's what epigenetics proves. There's certain genes that express themselves and some are turned off. So if your fascia remembers the trauma of a childhood or of as an adult because you didn't release it through meditation, it's sending those piezoelectric signals to your DNA, which is then the DNA that is expressing is actually the DNA of the coping mechanisms of your ancestors to deal with the pain. So the addictions, right? So it's sending these signals to the DNA and also to the body. I'm not safe. I'm not safe. I'm not safe because it remembers. So the way we restore fascia and we release the trauma from the muscles is through movement, through flow. And that's where mantra, meditation, and specific breathing techniques, because you have to be careful with breathing. I think breathing has, people call it breath work. I don't call it breath work. To me, it's breathing technology. It's breathing sequences, but it's becoming such a big word that if you've been through trauma, it can actually put you into a state of disassociation or depersonalization, which is why in my community, as a trauma-informed Kundalini yoga therapist, we always take a trauma-informed way of teaching as well, because we don't want to get you to depersonalize or disassociate, although we can't prevent it either. Kundalini energy sometimes awakens in those that have been through a lot of trauma abruptly without them even asking for it. And if that happens abruptly, it can be very shocking to the nervous system. But all we got to do is help you learn how to channel that energy again so that you don't get stuck, right? But we cannot avoid us remembering things. Like the subconscious mind is so powerful in the way it protects you and forgetting these things that you experience, which is why a lot of people are like, I'm so depressed and anxious as an adult. And yet I don't remember anything of my childhood. That's because your subconscious mind has done such a great job about blocking these memories from you, but they still live there. They're your personality. And we've had situations. I remember my teacher telling me about this time where a woman was practicing, she was in her Kundalini yoga therapy session. And then through the movement, she remembered that she had been raped as a child. And her subconscious had done just such a great job of forgetting that. Now, we have been trained as Kundalini yoga therapists to help people because she went into the state of dissociation. Dissociation, you're not even in your body. Your body, your subconscious mind is so strong that when it does become open, it's, oh my God, I don't want to be here. I'm back in the trauma. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. So then it doesn't know where it's at. Anger can come, tears. Basically, you don't feel like you're physically in your body, but we've been trained as Kundalini yoga therapists how to get people back into their bodies. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just a dysregulated moment. And the movement of energy through breathing and through mantra and through this specific protocol that we follow for post-traumatic stress and Kundalini yoga therapy, we're releasing that energy, right? And everything's a science in what we do in Kundalini yoga. The mudras, we put our hands in a specific direction or specific position. It's directing energy. That's all that it's doing. Your breath, it's directing energy, right? It help all of us. Emotions are energy and motion. None of us were taught how to direct it, how to channel it. So science will call meditation neuroplasticity and epigenetics. Kundalini, we call this the serpent awakening. And both of them are describing how your nervous system is designed by God and your brain and knows how to shed these old skins of identities, of trauma, and rise into renewal. So the serpent is never a demon. It is the built-in medicine for breaking generational trauma patterns and beyond that, so that you can accept the atonement, so that you can accept the Christos, the Christ consciousness within you. So let us be clear and let's reframe everything we've just talked about. Generational healing is not demonic, it is devotion. Kundalini energy and Kundalini yoga is not Satan. It's the nervous system's God-given design. And ancestral healing is not rebellion of God or demonic because you're talking to people that have been transitioned. It's restoration. It's creating that bridge with your ancestors so that they don't have to repeat the same process with future generations. And every civilization saw the serpent as wisdom, as healing, as life. It's religion that turned it into a monster to keep you afraid of your own body. And the real truth is that the serpent has always been your ancestor, your healer, your path back to God. So if any of this has interested you, and if you are somebody who is awakening to the fact that the temple is actually within you, that the serpent has always been waiting for you, and I'd like to invite you to join us at the Sovereign Sisterhood Sanctuary. This is an online virtual community and a movement for cycle breakers like you that are ready to integrate their own power. Because beyond the healing, it's about you remembering who you are and gnosis, a direct experience of God. And that's exactly what we do in our community through the teachings of Kundalini Yoga Therapy and, of course, in Miracle Spiritual Psychotherapy. So if you're interested, finding out more, click on the link below here in the description and find out what our movement is all about. And of course, I hope to see you there as one of our amazing sovereign sisters. I want to thank you all so much for being part of today's podcast episode. This is something that I have been wanting to do for such a long time. And of course, I believe in divine timing. And today has just felt so amazing to be able to share with you my own testimony, my own personal experience of God. It is my prayer for all of you that you yourself experience the divine within you, that you remember who you are, and that you reclaim your sovereignty, body, mind, and spirit. I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for liking this episode. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for subscribing. This only supports our movement at an even bigger level. And for that, we will forever be grateful for you. So I will see you all in the next podcast episode. Until then, remember who you are. Remember that the temple is within you and that the serpent has always been waiting for you. Satnam, beautiful sisters. I will see you soon.